March 6, 1945. After months stuck in the vicinity of the Siegfried Line, the tanks of the famous American 3rd Armored Division made their way to the heart of the German city of Cologne, located on the Rhine. Inside the city were the remains of the veteran 106th Panzer Brigade, which had been ordered to resist Cologne to the last man. The clash of both armored forces that took place within the city resulted in one of the most iconic duels of World War II. Furthermore, the confrontation could be filmed live, and these images will be vital for the reconstruction of the battle that we are going to do below. In March 1945, on the Western Front, the Germans were being pushed into the mighty Rhine River along the entire front. Cologne was destroyed by the enormous Allied bombings, and was a shadow of what it had once been. However, as Germany's 4th largest city, it still represented an important target for the Allies. One of the most important buildings in the city was the impressive Cologne Cathedral, which, although partially destroyed, still stood, dominating the metropolitan center of the city. Since the armored duel that we are going to analyze took place near it, the cathedral will serve as an orientation point. But to get there, we first need to go a little west and go back in time. By early March, American forces of the 3rd Armored Division were on the outskirts of Cologne, having been fighting virtually non-stop since Normandy. Leading the advance toward the city were the 45 tanks of Colonel Leander Doan's brigade. Of all of them, the protagonists of today's video will be the Sherman commanded by Lieutenant Karl Kellner, and the new Pershing tank commanded by Sergeant Robert Early. The Pershing, in particular, had entered combat for the first time just a few weeks ago, and had a weight of 46 tons, 100 mm frontal armor and a powerful 90 mm cannon. It was the American answer to the Panther and the German Tiger. The Allied attack plan was to advance on each flank of the city, closing off any escape to the north or south, while, at the same time, a central column led by Colonel Leander Doan's armor would fight its way through the heart of the city to capture the cathedral, and hopefully, the vital Hohenzollern bridge over the Rhine. Along with them was a group of journalists, eager to film combat scenes, even at the risk of death. As the American armor approached Cologne, and began to penetrate the outskirts of the city, the resistance opposed by the Germans increased. It was here where the infantry took center stage, having to capture the houses on each street to prevent a German soldier with a Panzer facet from destroying the American tanks. The city was defended by very depleted German units, which had been retreating at full speed from the west. Most of them were troops belonging to the Volkssturm and several Volksgrenadier divisions that did not exceed 400 or 500 troops, along with the 106th Panzer Brigade, which still had several Panther-type battle tanks in its squad. In the middle of the afternoon on March 5, the Americans began to make their way into the interior of Cologne, managing to penetrate to the vicinity of the cathedral in just a few hours. Because they knew that the main German defensive line had been established just on the bank of the Rhine, in front of the cathedral, the Americans paused their attacks during the night, and reorganized to attack the next day. On the other side of the city, the Germans were also preparing. By late afternoon, several Panzer IVs were able to reach the city after a hellish journey under continuous air attacks. Early on March 6, the situation in Cologne was as follows. A group of 4 Shermans and the Pershing commanded by Sergeant Robert Early had advanced right through the center of the city and were in front of the cathedral. A second group, which included Lieutenant Karl Kellner's Sherman, had advanced along the right flank, and was also very close to the cathedral. In this way, the objective was for both to converge in the square of the Cologne Cathedral. Only a few meters apart, the two groups were in radio contact at all times. Near them was the camera crew who were about to film all the action. On the German side, a Panzer IV and 2 Panthers were near the cathedral, determined to prevent the Americans from crossing the Rhine River. Commanding one of the Panthers was Sergeant Wilhelm Bartelborth, an experienced tank commander who carried the Iron Cross First Class from the 106th Panzer Brigade. According to the orders he had received, the German sergeant was to resist with his crew until the end, and in a tunnel just northeast of the cathedral, he awaited the arrival of the Americans. In this tense scenario, a civilian vehicle driven by a local shopkeeper, with his 27-year-old employee as a passenger, appeared right in the middle of where the armored confrontation was going to take place, apparently trying to escape the approaching confrontation in the almost deserted city. Without really knowing who it was, Robert Pershing opened fire and killed both civilians. At practically the same time, knowing that the American advance would be impossible to stop, the Germans demolished the Hohenzollern railway bridge, located just behind the cathedral, leaving their own troops isolated on the western bank of the Rhine. From this point on, there was no longer any way out for those Germans, who were forced to fight until the end. With each tank placed on alert, the German Panzer IV was spotted by the Americans, who quickly opened fire on it. The shots hit the building next to Panzer IV, which collapsed on top of the German armored vehicle. Thus, the Panzer IV was filled with debris and its turret was blocked. Surrounded, outgunned, and demoralized by the blowing up of the bridge and the damage his Panzer IV had received, Sergeant Gustav Schaefer gave the order to his men to abandon the Panzer. After running out of their armored vehicle, they headed to a basement near the cathedral to continue fighting as infantry. With the path now clear, the Pershing cautiously advanced towards the cathedral, with the infantry and camera crew following. Shortly after noon, the American column was close to reaching the bank of the Rhine. For the Americans, everything seemed to be going well until they emerged along this street that we are seeing on the map, in which the cathedral is already visible, being only a few hundred meters away. As soon as he looked out, one of the Shermans received a direct hit from one of the Panther tanks that were next to the cathedral, which after only 7 seconds was joined by another projectile that knocked out the American armored vehicle from a distance of about 350 meters. Shocked by what they had witnessed and unaware of the enemy tank's location, the crew of the second Sherman began to retreat for cover behind a pile of rubble, but was also hit by the hidden Panther. In less than a minute, 2 Shermans had been knocked out by an invisible enemy and 3 men had lost their lives. But where exactly was this enemy tank? The Panther, belonging to Sergeant Wilhelm Bartelborth, was located under this bridge that we are seeing on the screen, near the train station, and it was from this position that it shot down the first 2 Shermans. Aware of the danger, Robert, who was situated in the alley on the left, decided to get a better view from a safe place before risking his Pershing into the cathedral square. Dismounting, Robert entered a nearby building and from there he could see part of what was happening in the square. While he was there, he could see how the German Panther came out of hiding and adopted a new position, to cover the 3 possible entrances to the cathedral square. As we will see below, this was a very bad decision since the German tank was completely exposed. Once back in his Pershing tank, Robert began to advance to engage the German Panther. For their part, American reporters stayed inside a nearby building and prepared to record the combat. The Pershing advanced right down Marzellen Street, facing the German Panther on its right flank. At that moment, the German Panther was pointing towards the central street where it had just shot down 2 Shermans, and it was not expected that a Pershing would appear there. Once he detected it, it was too late. After a few seconds in which German Sergeant Bartelborth doubted whether it was a German or American tank, because it was the first time he had seen that model, he gave orders to orient his cannon to the right. While the Panther turned its turret to its right, the Pershing opened fire at a distance of about 110 meters, missing. Quickly, the American tank fired a second time, and this time it scored a direct hit against the German tank. While the Panther began to burn, and as can be seen in the images, the surviving crew abandoned the armored vehicle to try to save themselves. Following the destruction of the German tank, the weak German resistance in the vicinity of the cathedral soon collapsed, and the battle ended within a few hours. By the next day, the Americans managed to cross the Remagen Bridge about 50 kilometers to the south, and began to cross the Rhine. As a curiosity, the 3 main protagonists of the battle survived the war. On the one hand, we have Robert Early, who commanded the Pershing, and on the other, Gustav Schaefer, who who had commanded the downed Panzer IV, and Wilhelm Bartelborth, who was in command of the Panther destroyed by Robert. On a trip in 2013, Robert Early met Gustav Schaefer, right in the place where the two men had clashed 68 years ago. So, what did you think of this armored duel in Cologne? In addition, I have also left you another program in which I analyze another armored duel, in which a handful of Panzer IVs led by Ribbentrop and Prokhorovka faced more than 30 Soviet T-34s.